Good day, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We thank you for joining us. And our topic today is an excellent topic. It's exercise as medicine for brain health. So we have a wonderful speaker. I'll be telling you about him in just a few moments. But first, I want to thank our sponsors. These complimentary webinars are brought to you through a collaboration of sponsorship with O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, as well as Alzheimer's Orange County. And my name is Kim Bailey. I'm a gerontologist at Alzheimer's Orange County, and I will be your host today. Our sponsors are providing these webinars to you as a public service to the community on topics that are beneficial for anyone who cares for or works with older adults. And we hope that you find today's presentation informative and useful. We have a very wide, diverse audience today. I see we have some international guests. I see a gentleman from Nigeria is with us today. So we welcome all of our professionals as well as our lay family members to the topic today. Our speaker today is Dr. James Hicks. And as I said, I'll tell you about him in just a minute. But before I do that, let me just go over with you your requirements if you are seeking CEs. So CE credit is available for RCFE, that's residential care facilities for the elderly, those administrators, as well as licensed RNs and LVNs, and for LMFTs, LCSW, LEP, and LPCC professionals through CAMP and the BBC. You must be online for the full 60 minutes. You must have access to both audio and visual components on your computer. If you want CE credit, don't share your link with others. This is your unique record of attendance. If you share your link or use another attendee's link, you will not receive CE credit. There are a series of poll questions which we ask you to answer immediately. This is proof of your active attendance. So it's not really a knowledge check. It's more of a participation check. So you must answer the questions. If for any reason you have difficulty with the technology, simply place your answer in the chat box. If we don't receive any response from you regarding the poll questions, unfortunately, you won't qualify for CE credit. There'll be a survey to complete immediately as you exit the webinar. You will only receive a survey link by email if you do not complete the survey that's available when exiting the webinar. So the email with the survey link is set out 24 hours after the end of the webinar, and this link is unique to you and your attendance, so please don't share it with others. So now, and one more thing, a certificate of completion will be issued to you by email within 10 days, as long as all of your other CE requirements are met. So now we're done with that, and I just want to give you a few basics. Your mic and your video are automatically disabled and will remain so through the presentation. However, that doesn't mean you can't ask questions of Dr. Hicks. Simply type your questions into the chat, and we will have time set aside at the end of the presentation for a Q&A with Dr. Hicks. So don't use the raised hand feature because that's disabled as well. And once again, remember to complete that survey immediately as you exit the webinar. Now, with all that said, I want to introduce you to our speaker today, and let me tell you a little bit about him. Dr. James Hicks received his PhD in biomedical sciences from the School of Medicine, the University of New Mexico in 1984, followed by postdoctoral research at the Max Planck Institute for Experimental Medicine, Göttingen, Germany, and Scripps Institution of Oceanography, UC San Diego. As a broadly trained integrative physiologist, Jim is internationally known for his work on the comparative and evolutionary physiology of the vertebrate cardiopulmonary system. He has authored over 120 articles on topics ranging from the evolution of the vertebrate heart to the effects of microgravity on the human body. In 2014, he spearheaded the development of the Exercise Medicine and Sports Sciences Initiative at UC Irvine and was the director of the center until 2020. His leadership as the director of the center until 2020 underscored his dedication to fostering innovation and excellence in exercise biology and its relationship to human health. He has received several honors for his work in physiology, including being elected as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Physiological Society, and the California Academy of Sciences. During his 32-year tenure at UC Irvine, Jim has held pivotal leadership roles, including chair of his department, associate vice chancellor for research, and interim vice chancellor for research. And with that, I am going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Hicks. We give you a warm welcome, Dr. Hicks. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Kim. Can everybody hear? Can you hear me okay? Great. All right, so today what I'd like to do is talk about the role of regular physical activity on memory and cognition. And to give you sort of a brief outline of how the talk will proceed, I'll go over a brief interview about the challenge associated with Alzheimer's and dementia in general, human observations that led to the idea that regular physical activity could be important in not curing the disease, but maybe delaying its progression or improving aspects of the disease. This will lead us to the very landmark animal studies that were actually done here at UC Irvine, and then how that translated over into human studies. I'll give you a little bit of background on some of the potential mechanisms about how activity can influence the brain in terms of memory and cognition. Talk about the recent translational studies that are going on in terms of the role of physical activity in delaying the progression of Alzheimer's and memory loss, and then end up with talking about how much exercise do we need to achieve those kinds of benefits. So the challenge, I think, is well known to everyone about the challenge of Alzheimer's disease, and these are just a variety of facts and figures associated with that. We know it currently afflicts over 7 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's. 1 in 3 seniors die from Alzheimer's or dementia every year. There's a large number, in this case, 11 million Americans who provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's and other dementias, and therefore this disease has a large economic burden, currently about $360 billion, but projected in the next 20 years to going to $1 trillion. Here in Orange County, dementia, the prevalence of dementia is significant. Over 164,000 people are estimated to have dementia or mild cognitive impairment here in Orange County, with the greatest percentage of individuals being from the Latino community here. The projection of what will happen into the future with individuals with age-related memory loss and Alzheimer's is shown in this graph here. And as you can see, the ages 85 plus will be the largest growing population. And this is going to contribute then, as I said earlier, to the growing economic burden of the disease, approaching $1 trillion by 2050 here in the United States. Now, because of this, the challenge of the disease, its growth and its economic challenge, there's been a lot of interest in trying to develop drugs that can either cure the disease or slow its progression. And these are divided roughly up into those drugs that are associated with addressing the symptomatic aspects of the disease. These are called cognitive enhancing agents, and drugs that can modify the disease, particularly focusing on the amyloid plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's disease. Now, this graph is showing the number of clinical trials that have been done between 2002 and 2012. It's out of date, but to date, we've had over 400 clinical trials associated with the development of drugs for Alzheimer's, again, either addressing the symptomatic and cognitive effects or disease-modifying drugs. And the downside, or the bad news is, of these 400 clinical trials, about 98% have failed. This is shown here in several slides that show, for example, in 2016, this was the New York Times, Eli Lilly experimental Alzheimer drug failed in a large clinical trial. 2017, Merck halted their late-stage trial of a promising Alzheimer's drug. Janssen halted clinical trials of Alzheimer's candidate in 2018. 2019, Roche had 2 drug trials that were ongoing, and those were halted. And the failures of trying to find a drug that translated from animal studies into human studies resulted in op-ed pieces being written in 2019 that said, maybe we have to look somewhere else. What's left to do to try to address this particular disease? Well, in 2021, there was a drug that was approved by the FDA, this with the trade name Aduhelm. This was a monoclonal antibody that would bind to amyloid and reduce the amyloid burden in the brain. Initially, it was going to be it was approved by the FDA through an accelerated approval process. This was controversial. It actually resulted in 3 members of the approving committee resigning from the FDA resigning from the committee after it was approved. It was initially released with an annual cost of about $52,000. It later was renegotiated down to $28,000 annually. But there were a lot of side effects, or one particularly troubling side effects was the higher risk for brain bleedings or brain bleeds. And so that drug, in 2024, Biogen, the maker of that drug, announced that they would stop developing and marketing aducanumab and reallocate those funds to other Alzheimer's disease pipeline. In 2023, July 2023, there was a drug approved. Again, this is Leqembi. This is another amyloid modifying agent at the cost of $26,000 annually, and Medicare would cover some percentage of that. But the issue with these agents, these drugs that are binding to amyloid, about 25% of patients who are diagnosed with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease have no amyloid in their brain. So even if these drugs are proven to be effective, there's still going to be about 25% of the population who have Alzheimer's who will not be this will have no impact on their progression. So that brings us to poll question number 1.
Okay, everybody. Once again, this is our way of assuring that you are here and participating. And so we need everyone to answer the question. And let's see what that question is.
Okay, the question is, the vast majority of trials end in failure.
Okay. Once again, the vast majority of trials end in failure. Is that question true or false, audience? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat box since we can't see the poll. The majority of trials have ended in failure.
Okay, it looks like we got the majority of the right answers of true. Go ahead, Dr. Hicks.
Good job. Back to you, Dr. Hicks.
All right. So in 2021, Leroy Hood wrote an op-ed that appeared in the Los Angeles Times, and it was called "The Key to Treating Alzheimer's Disease May Not Be a Drug." For those of you that don't know Leroy Hood, Dr. Leroy Hood is at the University of Washington, was at the University of Washington, also at Caltech, and was one of the principal inventors of the technologies that resulted in that played a key role in the Human Genome Project. He's one of only 15 scientists who has been elected to both the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Medicine, and the National Academy of Engineering, and he won the Medal of Science, National Medal of Science from President Obama in 2011. The lack, and what he writes in the op-ed is that essentially saying that there has been this lack of progress in developing an effective drug or a combination of drugs to treat the disease. And he had concluded from his own personal experience, because his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, he expressed his opinion that just like we know for heart disease, which is the result of not only maybe some genetic factors, but also environmental factors, but also lifestyle factors, that heart disease we take for granted, or we know now can be reduced, or the risk for heart disease can be reduced by making changes in both our diet and our level of physical activity. And so Leroy Hood concluded the same thing by saying that harmful habits such as smoking can stave off heart disease. Studies have shown that a person's lifestyle can play a big role on whether and how fast that disease progresses. And so therefore, taking into account lifestyle might be, and changing lifestyle may play an important role in controlling the risk, or reducing the risk for Alzheimer's and dementia and other types of dementia, and also reducing their rate of progression. Now, this idea that lifestyle plays an important role in one's health, though, of course, is very old. And brings us to the next part of our talk here. We're looking at the human observations and studies that demonstrated this. Now, we can go all the way back from millennia to Hippocrates, who actually said if we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little, not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. The idea that regular physical activity plays a major role in our health is very old. And in fact, this is a monograph by Shadrach Rickinson, who was a Quaker physician born in New York in the 1700s. And he wrote and published this book in 1806 called The Means of Preserving Health and Preventing Disease. And take a look at this, at the sort of subtitle to that. It says, founded principally on an attention to air and climate, drink, food, sleep, exercise, clothing, passions of the mind, retentions, and excretions. This became a book that really defined a preventative, the importance of prevention in medicine. And I took a quote out of this book, which says, whose inclination, situation, or employment does not admit of exercise soon become pale, feebled, and disordered. And in the parlance of the 1800s, disordered meant of the mind, that the mind became disordered if you were not regularly exercising. Now we're going to fast forward here to the 1980s. There was an interesting study which looked at the role of systematic aerobic exercise in older women and looked at reaction times. And what they found was that in older women who undertook regular aerobic exercise, that they actually influenced the speed of their reaction to simple and discriminatory stimuli. And this is an important study because it's showing that, in fact, exercise itself can modify the functions of the brain, in this case, for reaction times to different kinds of stimulus. In the 1990s, a study that was published in the Journal of Clinical Epidemiology by this group here looked at a variety of factors that contributed to seniors that were classified as high functioning, medium functioning, and low functioning. And this in terms of mental acuity and other kinds of cognitive capacities. And I just want to underscore one of the investigators that was on this particular study. This is Carl Kottman. And we'll come back to Carl Kottman. He is a professor here at UC Irvine and plays a major role in the early animal studies that gave rise to the potential mechanism by which physical activity might improve our memories. In this particular study here, though, they looked at a variety of factors, including cigarette smoking, alcohol consumption, the level of physical activity per year, income, education, race, and self-related health, and other chronic conditions. And I'm not going to go through all of this. This is a very big study, but what I do want to focus on is physical activity. And look at the level of physical activity in those individuals that were classified as high functioning compared to medium, compared to low. And you can see that there is those with high functioning mental acuity exercise more frequently and at more strenuous levels than those who were at medium and low levels. And they conclude from this study that high-functioning 70 to 79-year-olds perform better on a diverse set of assessments of psychosocial and physiological functioning. They engage in productive activities. They reported greater feelings of life satisfaction. They're less likely to report anxiety and depression. They're more likely to consume alcohol. They have fewer chronic conditions. And most importantly, they engage in strenuous physical activity. I think that particular study, and I said that Carl Kottmann was one of the members of that, one of the authors of that study, was an important, is important because it was then from that experience that Carl Kottmann here at UC Irvine began to engage in a series of animal studies in which he looked at changes in the brain of animals that are running on wheels. And the animals that do that are rodents, mice and rats. And the early studies were done on rats. You give a rat a running wheel and they'll run all night long in that running wheel. And he simply set up a series of experiments where he prevented animals from running on their running wheels at night and then allowed other animals to run as much as they wanted to. So here is rats running on the running wheels. This is a picture of Dr. Kottmann here. And again, he has been at UC Irvine for 40-some years. He's a distinguished professor of neurology, neurobiology, and behavior. And he was a founding director of the UCI MIND, which is the center that focuses on neurodegenerative diseases here at UC Irvine. This is the paper, a classic paper that he published, or a landmark paper, I should say, published in Nature in 1995, in which he looked at exercise and brain neurotrophins, that is, chemicals that are released in the brain that are then stimulating neurogenesis, that is, the production of new neurons, the growth of new neurons, and synaptogenesis. Those are increasing the connectivity between these neurons. And I just pull out the one graph from this paper. And this is only a one-page paper, but it has a very significant impact on the field, in which he showed that if you plotted the running distance per night of the individual rats that were in the study and measured then the hippocampal BDNF, that's called hippocampal, that's a region of the brain that's very important in memory formation. And BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And if you plotted then the level of that BDNF in the hippocampus as a function of running distance per night, you saw that there was an increase. The more the animals ran, the more BDNF they produced. This would suggest then, if we know that BDNF from other studies is resulting in neurogenesis of the hippocampus, you would then conclude from this that individuals or animals that run a lot, including humans, might influence the size of the hippocampus. It's the volume of that. So this is poll question number 2.
Okay, poll question number 2. The greater the distance the rats ran, the greater the increase in BDNF. Okay, go ahead, everybody, and answer the question. If you are not able to put it into the poll, you can put it into the chat box. We'll give about 10 more seconds. Okay, perfect. It looks like we got the majority of everybody answering. And perfect. Everybody answered the correct answer of true. And Dr. Hicks, I'll hand it back over to you.
All right. So as I said, you would predict that the hippocampus would get larger. And in fact, there is, again, another landmark study looking at the effects of exercise on the hippocampus. This is by Eric Erickson and others. who looked at the volume of the hippocampus. In this particular slide, what they show are an MRI of the brain, and you're looking at 3 different regions: the thalamus, the caudate nucleus, and the hippocampus. We're going to focus on just the hippocampus. And what he showed was that he took in this series, it was 120 subjects who were human subjects that were involved in exercise training. And these are seniors, 65 and older, who were involved in exercise training, started as controls. And then they spent the first 7 weeks of the study, some of them just doing stretching exercises and not engaged in aerobic activity. And the other half of the group involved in walking at a vigorous pace. Firstly, the first 7 weeks was to get into shape. So they increased each week the 5 minutes in duration of walking, till they finally got to walking about 40 minutes per session over the next 6 months to a year. And what you find is, if you look at the hippocampus, is that there's an increase in hippocampal volume. That's the blue line here at the upper part of the graph, the blue line, whereas the hippocampal volume did not change significantly in those individuals who were sedentary or just involved in stretching exercises. You can go through this and you can show that the hippocampus, the greater the change in their fitness level. On the y-axis here, this is percent change in VO2 max. That's really, the VO2 max is just an indicator of your fitness level, so that those that had the biggest change in the fitness level had the biggest change out here in the hippocampal volume. And you can also see here that those that had the biggest change in hippocampal volume also had, it wasn't quite, well, this was significant, a significant change in the BDNF, that is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that was measured by a blood test. And that, in fact, those that had the biggest change in hippocampal volume, there was a trend for an increase in memory performance. This is actually the first study that really looked at this in any sort of detail. This is 2011. And so it was very suggestive that regular exercise, aerobic exercise, now walking, in this particular case, walking briskly, ends up increasing the hippocampal volume, and it ends up improving, getting a trending improvement in memory and cognition. The major conclusions of the Erickson study was that randomized controlled trial with 120 adults showed that aerobic exercise training increased the size of the hippocampus, and it led to improvements of spatial memory. That the exercise training increased hippocampal volume on average by about 2%, and this effectively reverses age-related loss in volume, because as we age, our hippocampus does tend to get smaller, and this actually reversed some of that age-related loss in volume. It demonstrated that the volume is associated with a greater serum level of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and that the hippocampal volume decline in the control group was attenuated in pre-intervention. Well, those individuals that were active prior to the start of the study, they had an attenuated decline, suggesting that fitness may protect against volume loss. Now, this is a slide that shows an aggregate of the many studies that were done after the Erickson study, looking at the role of aerobic exercise, either walking, running, swimming, or rowing, as a function and what impact it had on hippocampal volume. And in this diagram on the side, on the graph over here, it says Hedges G's. This is essentially looking at the effect of exercise, whether there's an effect or not, comparing to those who regularly exercise compared to those that do not, or live a more sedentary lifestyle. And so if you, any values that are on this side, on the right side of the graph, shows that the results are favoring exercise, and those that are below 0 here would be that exercise had no impact. And the majority of, when you look at all the studies in aggregate, and that's then the diamond here, the black diamond at the bottom, exercise did favor a larger, an increase in hippocampal volume spread out against all these various different studies that were done. So how does physical activity improve physiological function and brain function? What is this exercise factor? What is it that is happening to cause the hippocampus to change with exercise? Well, when we do exercise, there is an increase in muscle, and we're involved in locomotor activity. The contraction of the skeletal muscle increases the oxygen demands of the skeletal muscle, and therefore we breathe faster and our heart rate goes up. The fuels that are used by the skeletal muscle during exercise are carbohydrates and fats. And these are broken down to help provide the energy that helps then or results in the contraction of the skeletal muscles. What was discovered in the 1990s by a group in Copenhagen, Denmark, was that skeletal muscles, when they're undergoing contraction associated with physical activity, release a variety of small molecules that are now called myokines. These myokines leave the skeletal muscle, enter into the bloodstream, and have effects on other parts of the body. For much of the 20th century, the skeletal muscles were thought as the engines of locomotion, and most of the studies were focused on how skeletal muscle functioned itself in terms of driving locomotion and locomotor behavior. But this is a discovery by the group in Copenhagen showing that, in fact, that there are these molecules or these small molecules that are released, or small proteins released from the skeletal muscles called myokines, that could have downstream effects on other organs, show that the skeletal muscles themselves were not only the engines of locomotion, but in fact, they were an endocrine organ. They were producing compounds that could have effects on other organs. And so what we see today now is that there's been a identification of hundreds of these myokines that are released by skeletal muscles during activity that have effects on all parts of the body, including skin, the brain, of course, adipose tissue, the immune system, the other endocrine organs themselves, like the adrenal glands, the GI tract, the pancreas, the liver, bone, blood vessels. So the discovery of myokines associated with physical activity showed that there was this connection then, something's being released that then has a downstream positive effect on other organ systems. And what's become a very big area now in exercise science is what we call the crosstalk or inter-organ crosstalk within the body. And in this particular case, the crosstalk between the skeletal muscle and the brain. And there's a lot of information on this slide, but really the take-home message is that when you exercise, there are compounds that are released that enter into the circulation. These ultimately can find their ways not into other organs, but they can find their way into the brain, some of them. And also, when we are physically active, as I said, we're burning carbohydrates and fats. And one of the byproducts of fat metabolism during exercise is the production of this compound, BOHB, beta hydroxybutyrate. And beta hydroxybutyrate can actually gets released and can cross the blood-brain barrier and is involved in turning on the genes in the brain to produce brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So you have compounds these myokines that might be beneficial in turning on brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and you have a metabolic byproduct of exercise, beta hydroxybutyrate, that can also turn on the genes for brain-derived neurotrophic factor in the brain. Therefore, this increasing level of brain-derived neurotrophic factor ends up driving neurogenesis and synaptogenesis. Neurogenesis, the hippocampus gets larger and more synaptic connections, more communication between the neurons. And as we know, the hippocampus plays a primary role in the formation of memories and the way that we can consolidate and relate memories. So this leads us then to translational studies. And this is I just want to go over a meta-analysis that looks at a variety of translational studies that have been done. And this is a 2016 meta-analysis, which is in the Aging Research Reviews, and showing all the studies that were done around the world. This is showing the number of patients here, what their diagnosis was, the countries, whether they were all in either care or community facilities. And the basic question was, does exercise, aerobic exercise, and other types of exercise, does this influence the progression of the disease of Alzheimer's and memory loss, or does it have very little effect at all? And so the first slide here again is showing the overall effect of physical activity as an intervention on cognitive function in dementia. And this is a very similar looking graph to what we showed earlier. So again, if the results are in this direction to the right side, that favors the intervention. That would be favors exercise as having a positive effect. And if it's in this direction, exercise has little effect. And at the very bottom here, there is a little triangle or red or a black dot. That's the summary in which they take the aggregate of all these individual studies that are not connected in any way and to show what the effect is. And as you can see, there is an effect favoring physical activity as a positive intervention to improve cognitive function in patients that have mild cognitive decline or dementia. These are, again, in this meta-analysis, there were some studies that were specifically looking at patients with Alzheimer's disease, and there were other studies that showed that were looking at patients that had Alzheimer's disease. Excuse me, let me just go back here. That had Alzheimer's disease or non-Alzheimer's dementia. And as you see again here, that for these groups of studies that were looking at patients with either Alzheimer's or non-Alzheimer's dementia, that the studies were favored intervention. And if you look at the aggregate of those studies, they all significantly favor intervention as or physical activity as a positive intervention that improves then the cognitive capacity of the individuals. This looks at again, they look at subgroups of these studies that they were analyzing as the association between physical activity and cognition, looking at combining aerobic and non-aerobic intervention. So aerobic intervention would be, let's say, very mild or moderate. I'll give you an example. Moderate paced walking would be an aerobic style of intervention, whereas non-aerobic would be something that would be much more vigorous, where that would be higher intensity but less duration. And they also looked at aerobic only interventions, and they looked at non-aerobic interventions. And what they found is that of the studies that were done, that aerobic intervention had positive effects on both cognitive function, reducing the rate of loss of or improving memory capacity, and so both for aerobic intervention for both of those, but non-aerobic, those were more intense activities, may not have been as effective, showing there was actually little effect of that. This was showing the frequency of the intervention of physical activity on cognition. And you can look at studies in which they were doing greater than 150 minutes a week of aerobic activity and less than 150 minutes a week of aerobic activity. And again, they found that in both cases that there was a significant effect of regular physical activity on cognition. So the take-home message of that meta-analysis in 2016 was that regular aerobic activity of approximately about 150 minutes per week, which turns out to be about 30 minutes 5 times a week, at about 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate, results in improved memory and cognition. Aerobic activity increases hippocampal volume associated with improvements in memory. This has been shown in other studies other than just the Erickson study. That metabolic byproducts turn on the genes for expression of neurotrophic factors, contributing to neurogenesis and synaptogenesis. So part of this mechanism is when you're active, you're burning fuels, in this particular case, carbohydrates, but also fats. And the byproducts of that fat metabolism are actually going to be the signaling molecule that turns on the genes that produce BDNF that contribute then to neurogenesis and synaptogenesis. And that the conclusion right now is that regular aerobic activity may not be a cure, but it does or probably alters the trajectory of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So then the question is, how much then really physical activity? Because I've only showed you just a small bit here. This is there are many studies now that we could go over in much more detail, but how much physical activity is generally agreed upon to have these kind of health effects, these positive health effects for the brain? And this is from a slide from the American College of Sports Medicine. So what is aerobic activity? It's any rhythmic continuous activity: walking, jogging, swimming, cycling, dancing, anything that you can do where you're being regularly rhythmic, the rhythmic being regular contraction of your locomotor muscles. How often? 3 to 5 days per week. How hard? From light to somewhat hard, from a very light exercise to more moderate to maybe throwing in a little bit of hard exercise. How much? Well, if you haven't been doing a lot of activity, you start with just a few minutes and gradually build up to about 30 to 60 total minutes per day over the day. In that very first study I talked about from the Erickson group, that's what they did. They had of that 120 subjects that looked at exercise and hippocampal volume, that landmark study. They started out with 5 minutes a day of walking and slowly built up to, over a 7-week period, up to 30 to 40 minutes a day. What wasn't mentioned here is just strength training. And this is not, there haven't been a lot of studies showing that strength training improves memory or cognition, but strength training in general is very important as we age, because as we age, we do experience sarcopenia, that is the loss of muscle mass. And so it's very important that as we age, that we do regular strength training. And for that, the American College of Sports Medicine recommends about 2 to 3 days per week, with rest days in between. Start with light weights and slowly build up to medium or more harder efforts. How much? 10 to 15 reps to start with. And then as you build up, maybe 8 to 12 reps of a more challenging effort, a more heavier weight. So it is, again, the strength training is not necessarily, there's not many studies showing the effects of that on Alzheimer's and dementia, but it's very important in terms of healthy aging. So we come to poll question 3.
Okay, aerobic exercise 3 to 5 times a week is ideal. So go ahead and put your answers in, true or false. And if you're not able to put it on the screen, go ahead and type it into the chat box. We'll give about 15 more seconds for everybody to get their answer in. And again, if you're not able to answer, please put it into the chat box. Okay, looks like everybody's answered. And yes, the correct answer is true. Okay, Dr. Hicks, I'll pass it back over to you.
Okay. So how do we, I often get the question, how do I've sort of described for you how much exercise and sort of the levels of exercise, moderate versus more vigorous or more strenuous, but is there, how does one actually quantify that? If somebody says, well, go out and do moderate exercise, what is moderate? What is, and how does that differ from strenuous? Well, we show this slide again. When your muscles become active, with in this case, walking or running or swimming or cycling, they demand more oxygen. And as they demand more oxygen, your cardiovascular system becomes more active. Your heart rate goes up, your heart pumps more forcefully, and you eject more blood per heartbeat. You increase the amount of what we call cardiac output, the volume of blood that's going out to your skeletal muscles during that activity. Your heart rate goes up in a fairly linear manner as you increase your energetic demands. So as you go from very light exercise to more moderate to more strenuous exercise, your heart rate increases in almost a linear fashion. But it doesn't keep going up forever. You reach a maximum heart rate. That heart rate max can be estimated. And there's several algorithms that estimate it, but I always tell individuals that the easiest one is this, that heart rate max is 220 minus your age. One of the things that happens as we age is that our maximum heart rate falls with age. And so this 220 minus your age will give you a rough estimate about what your maximal heart rate is at your age. So for example, let's take a 50-year-old person who has an estimated maximum age-related heart rate would be 220 minus 50. That's 170 beats per minute. So now for moderate exercise, which is considered 50 to 70% of heart rate max, 50% would be 170 times 0.5 or 85 beats per minute. So if you can get your heart rate up to 85 beats per minute and hold it there for 30 minutes, that would be doing moderate exercise. But somewhere within the range of 50 to 70 would be considered moderate. And at the 70% range would be 170 times 0.7 or 119 beats per minute. For more vigorous exercise, 70 to 85, instead of 70 to 85%, it would be just then 70% of 170 or 119, and 85% of 170 would be 144. So if you have an Apple Watch or some kind of watch to measure your heart rate, you can just when you become active, you can just look down and see what your heart rate is, and you can get to your zone of where you want to be at your target zone. And this is a nice, easy way to determine the level that you are exercising at, as moderate or vigorous. Just some examples, though, of what moderate exercise and vigorous exercise would look like. Walking very briskly at about 4 miles per hour, cleaning, heavy cleaning, washing windows, vacuuming, mopping is considered moderate exercise. Mowing the lawn, hand mower, bicycling at a very light effort, about 10 to 12 miles per hour. Badminton, tennis are considered moderate. More vigorous would be hiking, jogging at 6 miles an hour or faster, shoveling snow or dirt, carrying heavy loads, faster cycling, basketball game, soccer game, tennis, these kinds of things are all considered vigorous activity. I have one last slide here that I want to show that I think is how I envision that exercise can be integrated into dementia treatment and Alzheimer's treatment. And that is when a person goes to see a neurologist and they're running through a variety of tests and exams to determine whether they have a decline in memory and cognitive capacity, or they might be the beginnings of Alzheimer's or signs of Alzheimer's. Right now, doctors are not really, neurologists are not really incorporating exercise and nutrition into the treatment in a rigorous way or in a very systematic way. We know that there are not lots of therapies available. There is now this Leqembi that's out there. So I just have an arrow saying, well, you could start these kinds of therapies, I guess. I'm not a physician, so I'm not going to say one way or another whether a person should start that, but that would be the pharmacological approach. But really, we should work for a medical system where once the neurologist has made this diagnosis, that they consider not only the pharmacological therapies, but they immediately consider the lifestyle approach. And that is, you could send someone that would be integrated into the medical community who's an exercise and nutrition expert, who would then meet with the patient and talk about the exercises that they could be doing that would then, and changes in their nutrition that could help slow the progression of the disease. As I said, right now, there's no pharmacological approach that's a cure, and exercise is not a cure. But the best thing we could do is by the combination of therapies or by changes in our lifestyle, slow the progression of the disease. And that's how I envision how exercise can play a role, and how exercise itself can play a major role in medical treatment. At the end here, I have just a variety of references if a PDF is made of this, or I can make these references available to the Alzheimer's Association, and they can make these available. These are just links to guidelines. This is from the CDC, the Physical Activity Guidelines for Americans, the newest, the 2019 edition, hasn't changed much in the last 3 years. And a variety of the information that was provided talked about today are from these websites as well: the American College of Sports Medicine, the Mayo Clinic, the American Heart Association, and the CDC. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Hi, I got just a couple of housekeeping items to take care of first, Dr. Hicks, but we want to start by thanking you so much for such a valuable topic and such useful information for all of us. We want to also remind everybody of the importance of being aware of implicit biases or unconscious stereotypes as we care for others. A best practice is a person-centered approach where we view each person that we care for as an individual with unique needs and preferences and treat them with dignity and respect, even when they're very different from ourselves. If we always listen carefully and respectfully so we understand their perspectives, values, and preferences, we can build trust and provide the very highest level of care. So now, if you have any questions for the presenter, be sure to type them into the chat box at this time. But before we begin that Q&A, I do want to take this time to thank our sponsors once more. We are so grateful to O'Connor Mortuary, Care Choices, Hospice and Palliative Services, Caring Companions at Home, and Alzheimer's Orange County. I also want to inform everyone of 3 great lectures that are coming up, webinars. One is on posterior cortical atrophy, an atypical form of Alzheimer's disease. That will be on Wednesday, May 8th. Then our regular monthly webinar the topic will be cultural awareness in dementia care. And then we'll have a special webinar presentation on May 29th, caring for a parent that did not care for you. So the first 2 I mentioned are CE presentations, but caring for a parent that did not care for you is not a CE. And all of this information is going to be emailed to you, and it's all up on our website, on our education calendar. We hope that you will join us. So let's go to the questions now. And Dr. Hicks, you won't be surprised at this question. In one of those older studies, you mentioned that high functioning individuals, 70 to 79, are more likely to consume alcohol.
Right.
Does that mean that it may be helpful to consume alcohol?
I think the general consensus right now is that what they would say moderate consumption of alcohol it has health benefits. Moderate consumption being defined as a glass of wine per night, a glass of beer, or a 1 ounce of harder liquor. Let's say an ounce of whiskey or something like that. So it has, 1 8-ounce glass of beer. It's essentially you get a J-shaped curve that that seems to be the optimal level. If you start drinking more than that, then of course it becomes an unhelpful practice. So I think the general consensus is that moderate consumption, as I just defined it, is considered healthful.
Thank you, Dr. Hicks. The next question, is there a best time to walk to gain the most benefit? Is there a time of day that stands out, or?
Yeah. That's a great question. There has been several recent studies looking at when's the perfect time to exercise, or is there an optimal time? I think the general conclusion is that morning is, you can actually there are biomarkers that show, physiological assessments that show that morning is probably the best time. But the overall conclusion is the benefits of exercise are so great that exercise whenever you can, whether it's morning, afternoon, or early evening, whenever you feel that you can get that 30 minutes in, 40 minutes in, that's when you should do the exercise. That the slight benefits of exercising in the early morning don't outweigh the overall benefit of exercising anytime throughout the day. I would say though, don't exercise just before you go to bed, because you'll stay awake a lot longer if you do that.
I maybe I'm like a lot of people. I like to walk after work because it helps me relieve the stress of the day.
Exactly right. Right.
Yeah. Okay. And then the same person was asking how long is optimal. You've already answered that, right? Do you want to reiterate?
Yeah, I think you want to work towards 30 minutes up to 40 minutes. And there are actually hundreds of studies now, not just for physical activity and brain health, but physical activity and all of its health benefits, that anything over an hour a day is not getting you additional benefits. And it seems like the
Interesting.
optimal time is between 30 and 40, maybe 45 minutes. And if you're doing that 3 to 5 times a week, you are going to get the optimal benefits of physical activity. As long as you're getting your heart rate up there to about, 60, 50, 60, 70% of your maximum.
That's fascinating. And does age matter? Because someone's asking, what is the amount of exercise needed for a 45-year-old compared to a 60 or 70 or 60 or 75-year-old?
It is the same across it's the same for all ages.
Interesting. Oh, I like this question. If a person has moderate Alzheimer's disease, will aerobic exercise help that person with assisting in their ADL functions, their activities of daily living? So will it actually improve their functioning, do you think, in the moderate stage?
I think that has been the conclusion of many of the studies showing that it improves their cognitive function. It doesn't, again, it doesn't cure dementia, it doesn't cure Alzheimer's, but it does slow the progression. And what some of these earlier studies showed is that aerobic activity, since we have this sort of naturally occurring reduction in the hippocampal volume with age, it actually slows that down. So you're getting some improvement there.
Okay, good. Someone is asking for a whole nother lecture here, I'm afraid. They're saying that you didn't really address diet. And
Right.
they said something about research that MCT oil has a positive effect on BDNF.
Right.
Do you know anything about that? Do you want to
Yeah, I
comment on
didn't.
that?
Yeah, I didn't comment on that. It is a whole different lecture, and I will say this. I I my field has focused a lot on exercise function, exercise performance, exercise physiology. Of all the things that we can do in our lifestyle, and exercise and diet are considered the two big ones. But of every study that's been done looking at exercise and then separately looking at diet, the biggest thing that you can do in terms of overall physical health and overall brain health is exercise. Diet is important, and I have a good colleague at the Mayo Clinic that says you can't exercise your way out of a poor diet. However, exercise has the biggest effect of anything that you can do in terms of a lifestyle change, in terms of your overall health. Diet is helpful, and if it's a really poor diet, you can't exercise you out of it. But the nutritional information tends to be the effects don't tend to be as large as you see with exercise. So I'm biased because of my background, and I just focus a lot on exercise. But diet is important. You do have to have a good diet. But in terms of supplements or the addition of different oil, different kinds of compounds to your daily diet, I don't have the background to address that in a serious way. So.
Thank you so much. So we really need our neurologists and our practitioners to, get out that prescription pad and write exercise at the top of the treatment plan.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
what is it? My question is, what does it take to get them there?
I think, yeah, I don't know that it's going to come down to an economic issue. That's most of our medical care in this country comes down to an economic issue.
Yeah.
I think that that there's no billing code for it right now.
That's the problem, right?
That's the one thing you'll hear back, because that slide that I showed envisioning the role of a physician and an exercise technologist in healthcare, I can apply that to cancer. I can apply that to any sort of disease.
Wow.
We do know that when people have a heart attack, they go to cardiac rehab. There's the model right there. So when somebody has been diagnosed with early onset dementia or Alzheimer's, we have the model. The model should be they should see an exercise specialist, just as we send cardiac patients to see an exercise specialist
Right.
for rehab, because we know rehabbing helps the heart. We know that physical activity helps the brain. And so there's the models there, but I don't know enough about the economics of healthcare other than I've been told, well, there's no billing code for it, and how do I charge for this then? How do I bill for this? So
Wow, and it's the cheapest way to make people healthy, right?
exactly right.
All right. We just have one more general question, and that's somebody wants to know about whether the links and resources are going to be shared after the presentation. And the answer to that is yes, because you all have the handout. It should have been emailed to you. If for some reason you didn't receive it, we can get that to you. And then also we will thanks to Dr. Hicks' permission, be recording the webinar, and that will be available soon as well. So just an excellent, excellent discussion today, Dr. Hicks. We thank you so much. And that does bring us to the conclusion of our webinar today. We thank Dr. Hicks. He spent his time and expertise with us, and that is valued by us. Please watch for the survey that will open up immediately as we end the webinar for everyone. Watch out for those flyers I talked about, those three topics. They'll be on our site at www.alzoc.org. Just visit there to learn more about all of our educational programs and webinars and to view past recordings of our webinars. Thank you to everyone, and may you all have a good day, and everybody get out and walk, okay? Bye-bye.
Bye.